Who could move commerce the fastest from one end of the United States to the other, from the West Coast to the East Coast? They took the bet and they started San Francisco, Sam Walton moving his products on the road network, and Union Pacific moving it by rail. And the race went on, and as you guessed, the Union Pacific reached New York City ahead of Sam Walton and his trucks. And the Union Pacific people were there, they were cheering, and the CEO got up to speak, and before he could say a word, a gentleman jumped forward from the audience and said, "Do you remember me?" to the CEO, and the CEO goes, "No, I don't remember you." He goes, "We started out in Union Pacific together. We're both junior executives, salespeople, Mark. And look at you, you're the CEO, and I'm still mid-level manager. What happened? I was better than you." The CEO looked at him and said, "Well, the difference was simple. You did it for the money, I did it for the brand." There's nothing else to remember today. Remember that your service members that I'm going to be talking about, they serve for the brand of the United States of America, not for money, not for personal gain, not for glory, not for anything else, but it's service, and that's what they do. I'm going to talk about a program we've instituted called Green Zone Training, where I'm going to share with you more about the culture of the student veterans that we deal with on a routine daily basis, and ask you to sign up to be a mentor. If you're willing to be a mentor, then stop by. I'll give you a placard. I ask you to post it outside your office, somewhere where a student veteran who needs to speak to someone and seek some assistance knows that there's someone in that room that just a little bit kind of can understand their issues. All right? All right, we'll just kind of walk through the slides. First slide. I put down just some, I call thoughts while running. I communicate that way with a little blog site I have. And, it's interesting, most of the kids that we have, which call themselves student veterans that are enrolled in our university today, they joined after 9/11. I find that to be the most remarkable thing. Kids that stood up and said, post 9/11 says, "I volunteered," knowing full well they're going to go to war. War is a terrible word. They volunteered to do this, and I challenge, is there a better example in our society of moral courage? I don't think so. Next slide. This whole military brand that I'm going to talk to you about is really, it's a closed society. It's different. It does something which I don't think we do. It does something which I think our founding fathers had as designed for this nation, but might be only in the military where it's been successful in integrating everything together. And so in the military you can take all these individual backgrounds, all this stuff here, and they make it work every day. Where else in society are we that successful? They make it work. They make it work. In fact, it's one place you can go regardless of race, creed, color, anything else, and you're all at the same starting line. And you can go as far as you want. Next slide. Thus, as part of this culture, I hope everyone here understands that our military student veterans may find it hard to understand, Next slide. Next slide. Complaints about cold weather today? Might be hard for your student veterans to understand that. Next slide. It's especially hard for your student veterans to understand when tell them that this whole war, someone says this whole war is about oil. They might not agree with you. Next slide. And they do startle to loud noises in a much different way than the average citizen. Next slide. And they're sometimes not too comfortable in their surroundings. Next slide. And many I've had experience with just aren't very sensitive to mistreatment of children and the complaints about children being a nuisance. This particular instance, this is one of my soldiers. She'd been deployed for 16 straight months without seeing her child. And this snapshot was actually taken as we arrived back into the United States of America. First time she's seen her child in 16 months. Next slide. And they do struggle making new friends, because many of the friends that they've had in the past went deeper beyond friendship, and sadly many of those folks aren't around. Next slide. It's hard for them to not forget the things that they've seen or done. And I like to say that the average 21-year-old student veteran at this university is actually 21 going on 41. Their life experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly. Next slide. So why do they do it? A guy asked that of our student veterans, and these are some of the answers I got. One I draw your attention to, which really caught me the most, is the one that they recognize that there's something greater out there. That it's not all about them. The me, the I factor, they don't use it. It's we, it's us. And they actually care about this country. They really care about it and its freedoms. Next slide. You know, when I entered the military, those are the days when anyone who was a problem child was sentenced to join the military. The judge either put you somewhere, or he put you in the military. But you know, those days are gone. The people that serve today, it's less than 1% of Americans. Less than 1%. That was hard for the sheikhs, the imams, and tribal leaders that I lived with throughout the years to understand. Less than 1% of this country serves. And none of them ever vote, yes, I want to go to war. And it's interesting, we even have a youth movement. Maximum age to even enlist and join the service is decreased from 42 to 35. Next slide. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the green zone. Next slide. Next slide. It's just an initiative that we've put together here at USM to try to educate, inform, and in some cases influence our faculty and staff to step up and help our student veterans. Next slide. Next. The training, simply as I'm talking about here, a little education. And I'm going to ask you to serve as a resource to talk and listen to these kids. And then one way to do it is to display the green zone moniker, which I have here, so that it's visible. One of the common comments I get from the student veterans is, we just don't know who really understands the situation that we sometimes encounter and deal with. We just don't know who. And I'll kind of, well, it doesn't need to be a veteran, no, but just someone that is willing to do one thing, and this is the big word that they keep throwing at me. Listen. Listen. And listen. I find myself spending endless hours just sitting there, and a kid will talk, and frankly, 90% of what the young man or young woman has to say is just kind of garbled a little bit. But at the end of it, they got it off their chest. Someone listened to them. They have a new ally. They have a friend. And there's a new trust. Next slide. And this is why I think we need to do this program. It's been endorsed by the university. The president himself said we need to go out and we need to inform and educate our staff and faculty so that we can be more helpful to the student population called student veterans. We have 1,021 student veterans or children of veterans attending the University of Southern Mississippi. That's 1,021 young people that the university is educating courtesy of the VA Educational Benefit Program. I'm a veteran. I didn't use my GI Bill, but I gave it to my son who used it to go to college. You can transfer it to your children. 1,021, that's an increase of 86 students since last fall. And it's a pretty significant population. Financially, it's worth about $4.5 million a semester to the university. But that's a lot of kids. That's a large number here at this university. Next slide. Just want to clear the air of any misconceptions, stereotypes on your veterans. No, they're not likely to have PTSD. They're not a risk to others. They're not in school only to get the benefits. They might struggle here academically, but not because they're intellectually inferior. They're not angry about it. No, this is what they really are. These kids take orders well. They're mission focused. They understand task, condition, standard. They know how to take something and make something of it, and in doing so, frankly, be a pretty good student. One of the biggest complaints I get from our student veterans is when we get in small groups within a classroom and we're given a project, we really don't like doing it. We're not interested in sitting around a library table and talking about the fraternity party, the sorority get-together, or the football game. We want to get it done. We want to get after it. We want to get it done. And they don't want to get it done and get after it. Next slide. Snapshot of our military. Forgive me for going through this, but it's important that we all understand. These are the branches of your military. The Coast Guard is not a branch of the military. It only becomes a branch by executive order. It used to belong to the Department of Transportation, and now it belongs to the Department of Homeland Security. It only becomes part of the Department of Defense when the President issues an order. These are components. You notice you got active, reserve, National Guard, and I added retirees, veterans, and families. I think they're a very strong component that's getting stronger each day. You should know about it. It's an all-volunteer force, but only 14% of that force is officers. The bulk of our force is enlisted folks. And I put the deployment lifestyle. You know, I served 32 years, and we moved 17 times in 32 years. I had two beautiful kids that did well. Went to all sorts of high schools. They graduated at the highest levels at Texas A&M, where they chose to go to school, and they're doing great stuff now. While they're growing up, there are many times they hated me. Another deployment, many times we were concerned about my son's response to things. But at the end of the day, I look back and said, Dad, that was a great life. We stood on the Eiffel Tower. We walked the sands of Normandy. We did some things. Funny thing, I got a call once from my wife when I was in Baghdad. She said, we got a problem with your son Michael. He's a senior in high school at Killeen High School in Texas. And the history teacher was upset with him because every time she would enter a new subject, Michael would jump up and say, well, you're wrong. You don't got it all right. So he'd give his rendition, and she'd always say, why do you know that? Well, I've been there. I've actually been there. Next slide. Just a little bit about the average service member. You know, somewhere in America today, ladies and gentlemen, many lives are going to be drastically changed. A doorbell is going to be rung, and most likely, a young wife is going to become a widow. She's going to be visited by an Army chaplain, an Army officer. They're going to say, we regret to inform you of the death of your husband. There's a war being fought. It's a war that's being fought for our freedom and our right to assemble here and do the things we do. It's a war that is far, far out of sight of us. It only comes home when a student veteran enters a classroom like this. Because that war is part of that kid or that gal's soul. Next slide. Now I'm going to show you the next 5 slides, just bear with me. I'm going to show you how complicated it is to be a veteran. Because all I'm about to show, imagine taking a kid right out of high school, and now I'm going to open his head, and I'm going to pour in a bunch of stuff. First thing, they're going to have to take an oath of enlistment or commission. They have to take a very sacred oath. Second, then they got to subscribe to a code of conduct. Next slide. Then they have to subscribe to a creed. It's interesting. I will never quit. Next slide. Then, when I put the Marine Corps because the Marine non-commissioned officers have an additional creed. Then they have to subscribe to a system of law that's completely foreign to civil law, called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's much different than what we go through in the military. For example, adultery is against the law. Clear cut. Clear cut. Adultery is committed, you go to jail. Clear cut. There's no debate, no cause effect, boom. So now they subscribe to a different set of laws. Next slide. Then they got to subscribe to a whole new set of policies and traditions. You know, they got to salute, retreat, flag goes down on every installation at night. They got to stop what they're doing. And then they have to subscribe to a set of core values, which is really interesting. I put the one honor in there because that's not to be confused with pride. Next slide. And then they got part of the culture subscribe to a set of beliefs, which I kind of laid out here. There's some barriers to that. But at the end of the day, the student veteran that walks into your classroom, next slide, has lived one heck of a lifestyle full of a set of rules that are governed by law, policy, tradition, and a strict set of rules. There's no room in any of this. It's all great expectations, and personally, it'd be very difficult for any human being to live day to day, 24 hours a day by any one of these alone, much less all of this being built in, the expectation. The average student veteran walks in will have been doing this for 3 years, 24 hours around the clock. Next slide. But what do you get when that kid walks in the door? You might have that package of great expectations, but wow, what a pretty good deal that comes in there. These people come in, they're motivated. They've all had some degree of leadership training. They understand time management. They understand, you know, through their age and maturity, how to be reliable. They understand things that most kids, when they enter the classroom, just don't quite get, at least not at that point in their lives. And what's really interesting is your veterans are not going to talk about getting a degree. They're going to talk about getting a career. Because that's what we put into them when they leave the military. When they leave the military, we make them sit through a 3-day period transition class, trying to focus them on pursuing education. We don't talk to them about a degree. It's time to get a career. Choose a school that will afford the opportunity to get a career, that will translate into a job and into a long-term future. Next slide. There are some contrasts. These young people come to you with all these great expectations and everything else. They're just a few of the contrasts which you're aware of. You know, the severe loss of individuality, the limited choice and option, few luxuries. I was a general officer in command of an Army division. I can tell you, whatever you've seen in film or read about, there's no luxuries. I had a bigger house than anyone else. But when one of the bathrooms didn't work, I still had to wait 6 months to get it fixed, just like everyone else. No luxuries. It's not about luxuries. It's about service, and more service. Next slide. There are some challenges in transitioning as these kids come off the combat zone and they go back home here. Most of the student veterans that you get will be combat veterans. There's all sorts of definitions of what's a combat veteran. You can be an infantryman on the front lines, being shot at every day, or you can be a logistician in a place like Kuwait, pushing for supplies and equipment. The fact is, it's all pretty much the same. It all contributes to the greater whole, but most of these kids come in combat veterans. They've seen that this piece has been something that's been a part of their life nonstop. In World War II, we would fight a battle, a platoon of 30 men would fight a battle that might last maybe 7 to 15 minutes. They probably wouldn't fight another battle for maybe 7 to 10 days. The kids are in Afghanistan and Iraq, they fight every single day. Every single day that the uses turn, they go out the wire, come in, go out that night, come in every single day. So they're deployed 12 months, every day of that year. Their life is placed at stake, and they've had to place other human beings' lives at stake. Next slide. These are post-deployment transition challenges that we tend to have to deal with our student veterans. I'm not going to talk about really more than just the first two, post-traumatic stress and then the suicide, because the suicide is It's a bigger problem, I think, than the Department of Defense really understands. Next slide. Leading into that, I got 2 slides. Just want you to read these real life experiences. Next 2 slides, these words were lifted from an interview with University of Southern Mississippi student veterans. Next slide. I didn't make these words up. These are words that came from young people that are here attending our university right now. Real life experiences. 360, most of them were deployed 12 months. 365 days they went through the same thing. And these real life experiences are for real. They're built over time. Next slide. Post-traumatic stress. I think the last statistic I saw is about 75% of our service members have some degree of post-traumatic stress. And these are basic thoughts and beliefs. You can't trust anyone. Someone's out to get me. Around every corner there's a bad guy. Something bad is about to happen no matter what I do to shape the environment. Next slide. These are warning signs that we should look for. The one that I see most often is one to get to know the person is the mood changes. Significant mood changes and behavioral changes. Noticeable. But I'll be frank with you, I don't think the Veterans Administration does a good job with this, with dealing with our service members that have post-traumatic stress challenges. I just don't think, number one, the kids don't want to talk about it. Number two, they don't want to be identified with the problem. They didn't want to be identified in the service because they felt that the minute they were identified in the service, their career was ended. And they didn't want to be identified post-service because the one thing they wanted when they left the service was just get out and go. I think it was like 5 years ago, 90% of our enlisted kids didn't even check in with the Veterans Administration when they left. They just wanted to go, get it behind, just move on to different life. Next slide. You can be go unrecognized unless you're, if you're suspicious, you got to ask the right questions, and I give you a few thoughts, questions that you might want to follow, consider in talking to the young man or young woman. And oh, by the way, women in combat, women out of combat, let there be no doubt in anyone's mind that women have been in combat ever since I've been fighting as a soldier in the United States Army. Maybe not by design, but they're in the middle of it. It's just the way it is. The battlefield is everywhere. It's everywhere. Next slide. And there's some resources, and I'm going to post this online on our website, so you can always go to this, but I've got a little hard to read the red, but there's resources that I arm you with if you'd like to consider in reaching out and trying to provide a little assistance to one of these youngsters. Next slide. Military suicide. You can read this, but what I will tell you is I don't think these numbers are anywhere close to being correct. The reason is because when you're a Reserve or National Guard service member, you're called up, you deploy, you go home, 2 weeks later you're gone. You're back into your civilian job. And the military doesn't track your life from a medical perspective. When I brought my 28,000 soldiers home from Iraq, I wouldn't let them go anywhere for 2 weeks. We had such close control of them. For 16 months we came home, I didn't want to let it just all go. We kept close control. I brought in mental health care providers. I made sure that these kids were able to hover down before they really were able to integrate with their families. Next slide. The military suicide, it's if there's one red warning light I give to you in this presentation, that's this whole suicide thing. This is real. A lot of these kids come back, they struggle. There's no one to reach out to. They don't feel that anyone's willing to listen to them. They crawl back into their hole. You got to understand, 70% of our service members, when they leave the service, don't go home. They've outgrown home. They relocate somewhere else. That's one of the reasons it makes our BSN program so attractive here. Because we know that they're not going to go home, so you can relocate here to the coast and go to school here. So they really don't have that close-knit family reaching out and holding on to them. Very lonely. Next slide. Next two slides just lay out a few precursors. Things that we should look at, signs that we should keep in the back of our mind. Next slide. I got so sensitized about suicides that whenever I commanded Fort Hood, Texas, I also commanded Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was so sensitized about this that the minute any soldier and family member, I expanded started exhibit anything like this, I didn't let the sun go down. Wouldn't wait for the next day. Took no chance. Got them help. Next slide. This is the media attention slide. You see any of these signs? Action now. You can't wait. If a service member says, I'm thinking about hurting or killing myself, the service member probably means that. The idea of hurting or killing, death is very different to them, based on their life experiences. Next slide. And here's some locations we can reach out to seek help. Next slide. A couple slides of positive coping actions just in dealing with our veterans as a whole. Number one, I like to tell them exercise, physical exercise and spiritual exercise tend to make the mental side of their life a lot more simpler. So I ask that you go ahead and recommend the idea of exercise, both physical, spiritual, and anything I have up here. On the next slide, please. Or next slide. What we can do more than anything else is, like I said, be a good listener. Be genuine. Be positive. Don't be afraid. These kids are great. These student veterans are great. They're great. They serve their nation. They put their life on the line for reasons which it's hard to figure out sometimes. And they believe in the United States. They believe in our values. They believe that it's worth dying for. They're good kids. They're a little different. They'll dress a little different. They'll talk a little different. They might even act a little different. But they want one thing more than anything else. They want someone that they can cling to, that will listen to them. And you're closer in their mind and age than the fellow student is. The fellow student just doesn't fit. They left that behind. And they're used to dealing with non-commissioned officers and officers of this age group that is willing to counsel, listen, and help them. But they probably won't reach out. They probably won't take the first step. Next slide. Just some do's and don't. Dignity and respect. We must all treat each other that way, but we can't forget that. Don't try to talk the talk. I've been there. Don't try to do that. It's fine. I can't do that with my son. My wife kept reminding me, your son doesn't want to hear how you went through it. You did it. It doesn't work, and it does work. Not with the student veterans. Don't try. Don't try to con them. Don't try to be something you aren't. Just be a good listener, an adult that cares, respects what they've done, but more important, has greater respect for what they can do and can become with a great career. Next slide. And then I'll close with this. Remember that most of us, and you probably don't have professional credentials to solve their problems there on the spot. But we certainly are smart enough to arm with a little bit of information.
One other group needs to be added to that.
Okay.
Only MDs, licensed counselors, attorneys, and clergy.
Clergy. Yeah, okay, very good. That's a great input. I appreciate that. That's a good point. In fact, these kids are used to dealing with clergy in the military. They're used to going to the chaplain, the unit chaplain, and helping out. Well, that concludes what I had to share with you. As I reach out to you and ask you to consider being one of those people that makes themselves available to listen to a student veteran. In time, they'll come out of the closet if they feel there's someone there that they can trust. And the only way we build trust, I think, with this group is first identifying ourselves as being willing to help them, and second, actively listening to them. What sort of questions do you